So I came across this quote this week from Chris Hayes, who used to be my colleague at The Nation, and you probably know as a host of MSNBC program. And he was interviewed at Columbia Journalism Review, and he said this. He said, Trump is uniquely sociopathic, but his sociopathic qualities fit perfectly with what the movement wants, which is why he has been raised up by that movement. The crisis in America right now, to me, is the controlling faction of one of the two major political coalitions that is radicalizing against democracy. And it is not the full coalition, right? It's a faction, but it's a controlling faction. Like the Bolsheviks were just a faction, and they took the Winter Palace with so few men, and that's the worry. So here we are, where we're in a position, as I say in most of my columns. You know, I worked at The Nation for 25 years, and every once in a while, people would talk about the threat of fascism, and I always thought that was overblown and just detrimental to the writer's credibility. But here we are, and we are facing a threat of homegrown fascism, for real, something I never thought I would live to say. And the press, mainstream media, has played a significant role in enabling that threat of fascism to come to being. And that's what I'm going to talk about, how we got to this moment that Chris was describing, and that I keep sounding the alarm about in my weekly column and whatever else I do. And my last book, Lying in State. So I'll talk for a while, and I don't have any clocks in front of me, so please stop me. Okay, I'm asking you seriously. So the question is, where does one begin? Where does this moment? What are the origins of this moment? How do we get here in this crazy place that we're in that we never thought was possible? Even I never thought was possible, even though I've been at this left-wing magazine for 25 years. I would say the obvious place to begin is in the career, if we're talking about the press, is in the career of Joe McCarthy, Senator McCarthy, junior senator from Wisconsin. Because McCarthy had a genius for press manipulation similar to that of Donald Trump. And I consider both of them to be geniuses in press manipulation without either one being terribly intelligent. I think genius and intelligence are two different things. But McCarthy figured out that he could say because he was a senator, he could say anything at all, and the press would report it in a straightforward way. And because they wanted to be fair to the other side, they would then go to the other side and get their view and let the reader or the listener or the viewer decide who was right. So McCarthy could say, Robert Shapiro is a communist spy. And then the press would report that. And then they would go to Robert Shapiro and say, are you a communist spy? They would say, no, I'm not. And then the press would say, the next day's report or that evening's news report would say, Senator from Wisconsin says the guy is a communist spy. The guy says he is. You decide. But of course, you can't decide. This is what I mean by the problem with objectivity, journalistic objectivity, is that it has no bias in favor of truth. It simply feels a willingness to give both sides. And McCarthy was a genius for exploiting this lack of bias of truth until he self-destructed eventually, after quite a while, and doing quite a lot of damage. And McCarthyism became a curse in American language. But it never really went away. Now, when Ronald Reagan became president, he had a great deal of sympathy for McCarthy. And he used some of his tactics, but Ronald Reagan had this, you always hear it described as a sunny disposition. He was a likable fellow. He was always in a good mood. He was optimistic. And he came to power at a time when the media, the mainstream media, were feeling very vulnerable because they had brought down Richard Nixon. Watergate had made heroes of the press, Bernstein and Woodward and Ben Bradley in the movies. Bernstein got to date Elizabeth Taylor. It was played by Dustin Hoffman. Woodward was played by Robert Redford. You really can't be any more famous than that. And then they were rather critical of Jimmy Carter, whose presidency was seen as a failure. And Bradley, when Reagan was elected, Bradley said aloud that the members of the press didn't really understand how this clownish figure could have been elected president. They were out of touch with the country, and they had to be careful because they needed to represent the country, and they were disconnected somehow. So they went deliberately easy on Reagan. And Reagan had a penchant for saying things that were completely made up. That air pollution came from plants and trees. He even told a story that he had helped liberate the concentration camps in Germany when in fact he had never left. And for a while, the media were reporting on his falsehood, but they found that people didn't care, that they liked Reagan, and that was that. And Reagan, again, you never knew what the deal was with Reagan. Like he ended up suffering from Alzheimer's, and nobody really knows when, because he kind of acted like he had Alzheimer's before he had Alzheimer's. But Newt Gingrich, when he became Speaker of the House in 1996, he weaponized this insight. And he found that he could say virtually anything at all with the idea of discrediting his opposition, and the media would report it. And again, they would go to the other side, and the other side would deny it. But the attack stuck. And Gingrich became Speaker of the House, and he used to give seminars to his fellow young congressmen that he brought in with him when he won that enormous vote in 1994, when the Republicans took the House. And this became the modus operandi for the Republican Party. And it worked. There was no pushback. The Democrats didn't know how to deal with it, and the press didn't know how to do it. The press still was tied to this idea of objectivity, of what I call both sidesism. They used to call it on the one handism, but that never took. So I went along with the crowd on both sides of it. And it got crazier and crazier over time. It was with Bill Clinton, we heard stories that made it into the mainstream media that he had been a murderer. All kinds of things were reported as if straight. Some of them, had a grain of truth, not the murderer stuff, but the sex stuff, and that opened the floodgates to other things. It was social media that, and Fox News that took off first during Clinton's impeachment trial, but then under George W. Bush's presidency and the 9/11 attacks, following the 9/11 attacks. It became a very harsh kind of attack that if you raised questions about what the president said under Bush or what the military said, if you raised questions based on the fact that you had better evidence, your patriotism was questioned. And the media were already, again, incredibly eager to demonstrate that they were just as patriotic as anyone else. So you had these two things going on. You had the willingness to exploit the need for objective reporting, and you also had the need to show that you were not liberal, anti-patriotic, anti-American, something that the growth of the right-wing media, most prominently Fox News, but also the enormous growth of talk radio. At one point, talk radio, the singular figure of Rush Limbaugh, surpassed all of the nightly network news as a source of news during the Clinton administration. 20-something million people were listening to Rush Limbaugh. If you added up ABC, NBC, CBS, even the news, they didn't quite reach that figure. So the right-wing media not only became a very powerful force in the conversation itself, it also acted as a gravitational force for the rest of the media because it was so effective at determining the terms of discourse, number one, and also because it made so much money. Fox News began making $1 billion a year, and the other networks were profitable companies, for-profit companies, and they were jealous. They wanted some of those viewers too. So everything was pushing in the direction of embracing the lies. Very little was pushing in the direction of embracing the truth. Now, things went overboard. Most of the people in the country agreed. Under George W. Bush, the economy was in crisis and the Iraq war was a catastrophe. And so the country elected, amazingly, Barack Hussein Obama as president. And Barack Obama, I have to say, was a remarkable politician in a lot of ways. First of all, getting elected with the name Barack Hussein Obama. But Barack Obama told the truth almost always. I think I counted up in my book about presidential lying that he told 12 lies in 8 years, 12 falsehoods in 8 years, and he never told the same one twice. So if he found out that he had said something false, he never repeated it. He literally told fewer lies in his entire 8-year period than his predecessor, Donald Trump, would tell in an average 10 minutes. But the idea of telling the truth and telling lies, as far as the media were reporting it, it didn't really enter into the calculation. Again, the question was what the person was saying effective? Was one side being represented or not? So under Obama, and this again, I haven't really done justice to the right-wing attack on the mainstream media, but it was always there. It was always in the minds of the people producing the news, and they were always looking for opportunities to push back against it, say, no, we're not liberal, we're not what you accuse us of being. And so, for example, when Barack Obama became president in 2008, the single most frequently booked person on NBC's Meet the Press, which is the most prestigious of all television news shows, was the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who had no official position at the time. He was the most frequently booked guest. The actual Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, did not appear on Meet the Press that entire year. And Gingrich, you may remember, was forced out both for corruption and for his own personal life and sexual issues. And he came back and said crazier thing after crazier thing. And this did not in any way affect his attractiveness as a commentator or an honored guest. I had 1 minute before this talk, and I went to Lying in State, and I tried to just find an example of the kinds of things that the most frequently guests on Meet the Press, booked guests on Meet the Press, was saying back then. And here's one. He quoted a cover story in Forbes by Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh D'Souza, who was pardoned by Donald Trump after having been convicted of a felony with regard to election contributions. I'm going to read just a little bit. In September 2010, D'Souza published a cover story in Forbes, which he argued that owing to the president's relationship with his father, whom Obama had neither seen nor spoken to since age 9, the United States was now, quote, being ruled according to the dreams of a Luau tribesman of the 1950s. He added that, quote, this philandering, inebriated African socialist who raged against the world for denying him the realization of his anti-colonial ambitions is now setting the nation's agenda through the reincarnation of the dreams of his son. That's who Gingrich quoted on Meet the Press, that very same analysis. Now that's nuts, okay? That's just insane. And I don't even think D'Souza believed it, much less Gingrich. But again, it got no pushback from the hosts of the show. They could have gone to Obama and said, are you, in fact, living off the dreams of your African socialist Luau tribesman father? But they didn't feel, that's just too crazy. The whole thing is off the rails. Now, that was an entree to the campaign that insisted that Obama was not born in this country, that he was not a legitimate president, and that he was a Muslim, which is what opened the door to Donald Trump's presidency. Now, what laid the groundwork for this, again, was the unwillingness of the leaders of the Republican Party, John Boehner, who is today considered to be kind of more nostalgic for his reasonableness compared to what we have today. He would not go on the record and say that yes, Obama had been born in the United States when asked. None of the top Republicans. They would say it's not up to me to tell people what to believe, and the mainstream media enabled it. Now, getting to Trump, and how much time do you think I got? I can't hear you.
You can take 5 more minutes on Trump if you'd like.
Okay. Well,
or even a little more, because it's the focus here.
Okay. So the thing about Trump, there's a lot of things to say about Trump, obviously. One thing to say is that he made his living first in the world of New York real estate, where if you tell the truth, you're a chump. There's just no value at all in truth. You do the deal, and it's the buyer's business to find out what he's buying, and not from the seller. Then he made his second career when he was completely failure in the real estate business on TV, thanks in fact to Jeff Zucker, who promoted his show on NBC before he became president of CNN. And again, that show, The Apprentice and The Celebrity Apprentice, they were entirely fictional. They treated Trump's business as if it had been successful when it was a complete failure. They even had to redecorate Trump's office because it was falling apart and it would look terrible on TV. And then they also had to make sense of the thing that Trump said because Trump didn't speak sensibly. This is all on record from the producers after the fact. So Donald Trump came to the presidency as a professional huckster who existed as a personality on TV, and a personality that had nothing whatsoever to do with who he really was or what he stood for. I mean, when he was running for president, he said a lot of things that sounded liberal, and nobody really knew what they were getting. Now, the media found Trump irresistible. Les Spoons, who was head of CBS at the time, is quoted as saying, "He may not be very good for the country, but he's awfully good for CBS." And that was true of all the networks. They resisted him at first, but then they just basically gave into him. CNN, who Trump would later call the enemy of the people and be very critical of, they hired not only Kelly McEnany, who later became Trump's press secretary and is now on Fox, and Jeffrey Lord to represent Trump on their station. They also hired, I've always found this very significant, other people don't get as excited about it. They also hired Corey Lewandowski to be a commentator on CNN, even though at the time Lewandowski had signed a non-disparagement and non-disclosure agreement with the Trump campaign because he had just been fired as the manager of the campaign. He also punched a reporter, a female reporter, but that had nothing to do with being fired. So Lewandowski was legally enjoined by his contract from telling the truth on the air because of this non-disclosure and non-disparagement. And yet CNN didn't care. They didn't care that they were knowingly deceiving their viewers because it was more important for them to reach out to Trump viewers. And this is just one example of many, many, many examples I could give where CNN and MSNBC, certainly Fox, felt a need to put the entertainment value that Trump provided above the value of telling people the truth, of playing a role in a democracy that the First Amendment is there to ensure that we have an electorate that has the information necessary to choose their leaders. That's why there's a First Amendment. There's not a First Amendment to protect dentists. There's not a First Amendment to protect plumbers, even though they're both very important. There's a First Amendment there because a democracy can't function unless people have the information they need to choose their leaders. And this function was deliberately undermined by the media companies who were charged, who live with its privileges, who enjoy its privileges as a result. So Trump won the election in significant measure as a result of this collapse of responsibility on the part of the mainstream media. And then he became president. And again, he was a ridiculous figure from day one. From the day of the inauguration, when he was lying about the crowd size. Then he went to the CIA a day later, and he brought his own applause people to the platform and lied on that day. And everyone thought, this is crazy, this is nuts. But Trump was able to create this alternative reality, telling tens of thousands of lies. And these lies, every once in a while, they were called lies, every once in a while. But by and large, they were posed as both sides. Trump says this, the Democrats say that. You reader, you viewer, you listener, you make the decision about who's telling the truth. The newspapers did run fact checks. I want to give a shout out to Daniel Dale, first of the Toronto Star and then of CNN, in my view, the MVP of Trump reporting. But the fact checks were in a different part of the newspaper when they appeared than the story where Trump got to tell his lies. And so the lies carried the day. And eventually, again, he was so outrageous. He was a sociopath. And he's probably mentally ill. And so he went a little too far. And so he did not win re-election. He was creating the fundamentals of the fascist movement. Now, I don't think Trump knows anything about fascism, although his ex-wife says that he slept with a copy of Hitler's speeches by his bed. I doubt that he read them very carefully. But he had an instinct for fascism. I don't think Mussolini read about fascism either. I think that this idea that he appealed to authoritarianism, the authoritarian instincts of Trump, and the willingness of his followers to go along with it, created the threat that we face today. You can't read the minds of the Republican politicians and the people in the conservative media like Fox and Newsmax, etc. But my impression is that they know better than the things that they parrot of Trump. So they know Trump didn't win the election. They know that the people who showed up on January 6th were not, as Tucker Carlson said, tourists from bad area codes, bad zip codes. But they also understand that the country is in the grips of this mania that Trump both represents and created and continues to stoke. And my position is that because the mainstream media has stuck to its way of doing business that Joseph McCarthy originally showed the weaknesses of, but that has been now exploited through Reagan, through Gingrich, and through the Republican Party to go out of them on an industrial basis, that the groundwork has been laid for this movement to continue and grow and possibly grow, given the fact that they're passing laws to clamp down on voting and clamp down on information and telling people what they can teach in schools and so forth. That a homegrown form of fascism is a very real threat. We're already seeing parts of it implemented, and the media does not understand that the old ways of doing things, objective reporting in the case where people have no respect whatsoever for truth and no respect for democracy, just doesn't work. So there are other people that are truthful. I could give a talk about the weaknesses of the Democratic Party and the role of money in politics and so forth. But tonight we're talking about the role of the media in enabling this threat. And I think it's well past midnight. I think it's time to stop pussyfooting around. The threat of fascism is real. The threat to democracy is real, and we need a new way of doing business.